Jacob Harrow grew up in a small town, far removed from the fast-paced world of business and innovation. His childhood was marked by an intense desire to escape the limitations of his humble beginnings. Raised by a single mother, Jacob watched her struggle to make ends meet while trying to give him the best opportunities she could. From a young age, he understood the value of hard work and the power of determination. Despite facing financial challenges, Jacob was always a standout student. He had an innate talent for technology and problem-solving, often spending hours tinkering with computers and learning coding languages. By the time he graduated high school, it was clear that his path would be in the world of business. He enrolled in a prestigious university where he studied computer science and business management, determined to make a name for himself. Jacob's rise was swift. Upon graduation, he worked for a series of well-known tech firms, quickly climbing the ranks due to his innovative thinking and sharp business acumen. It wasn't long before he saw an opportunity to strike out on his own. He founded Harrow Innovations, a startup focused on developing cutting-edge software for businesses. The company quickly gained attention thanks to Jacob's ability to foresee industry trends and create solutions that others hadn't yet thought of. His success didn't come without sacrifice. As his business grew, so did his obsession with it. Long nights spent at the office became a regular routine, and his social life dwindled. It was a price he was willing to pay for success, and he often told himself that once the company was established, he would have time for everything else. But that time never seemed to come. In the midst of his burgeoning empire, Jacob met Veronica. She was beautiful, confident, and just as driven as he was. Veronica had built her own career in the business world, working as a marketing strategist for several large corporations. She was everything Jacob needed in a partner: smart, ambitious, and supportive. Their connection was immediate, and it didn't take long for their relationship to blossom into marriage. To the outside world, Jacob and Veronica were the perfect couple. They attended high-profile events, traveled the world, and shared in the triumphs of Jacob's growing business. Veronica played a significant role in Harrow Innovations' success, helping to shape the company's public image and acting as its spokesperson. She was an asset to Jacob, not just as a wife, but as a business partner. Despite the perfect exterior, cracks began to form beneath the surface. Jacob's dedication to Harrow Innovations left little room for personal connection, and Veronica, while supportive, began to feel the strain of always being in his shadow. She didn't mind the sacrifices at first, but as the years wore on, she began to feel increasingly lonely. Jacob, consumed by his work, failed to notice the growing distance between them. His obsession with the company clouded his ability to see the cracks forming in his personal life. Meanwhile, the business world had become more competitive. Jacob's company had plenty of rivals, but none as fierce as Victor Moore, the CEO of a rival tech company. Victor was everything Jacob wasn't: charismatic, charming, and deeply strategic in his business dealings. He wasn't just a competitor, he was a force to be reckoned with, and Jacob knew it. The tension between the two men grew as their companies competed for dominance in the market, each trying to outmaneuver the other at every turn. Jacob's single-minded pursuit of success began to consume him entirely, making him increasingly oblivious to the dangers lurking in his own home. The partnership between Veronica and Victor Moore started as a purely professional arrangement. Veronica had been managing public relations for Harrow Innovations for years, and her reputation as one of the best in the industry had attracted the attention of Victor Moore. Victor was the CEO of Moore Technologies, a growing tech company that posed a real threat to Harrow Innovations. With both companies vying for the same market, Veronica's experience and industry insight made her an ideal candidate to help Victor improve his company's image and gain a competitive edge. The first few meetings were nothing more than business exchanges. Veronica and Victor discussed strategies, marketing campaigns, and potential collaborations. But as the weeks went by, their interactions began to shift. What had started as professional meetings over coffee soon turned into long lunches and private dinners at upscale restaurants. They spent more time together outside of the office, brainstorming ideas and discussing business plans, with no one else around to witness their growing connection. For Veronica, there was something exhilarating about being in Victor's presence. He was charming, persuasive, and attentive in ways that Jacob, preoccupied with his business, had stopped being. In Victor, she found a man who not only understood the pressures of the corporate world but also seemed genuinely interested in her thoughts, feelings, and ambitions. His charisma was magnetic, and he made her feel seen in a way that Jacob, buried in his work, hadn't in years. She told herself it was just business, a temporary distraction, but deep down, she knew it was something more. Victor, on the other hand, had his own agenda. He wasn't just interested in working with Veronica, he was captivated by her. He saw her as a powerful asset, someone who could help him take more technologies to new heights, but he also recognized the attraction between them. Victor was skilled at reading people, and he could tell Veronica was beginning to pull away from her marriage. He didn't waste time capitalizing on this vulnerability. Soon, their professional relationship blurred into something personal. The texts and calls, initially about business matters, became more frequent and increasingly intimate. At first, Veronica hesitated, unsure of how far to go, but the temptation was too strong. She found herself looking forward to her meetings with Victor, feeling a rush of excitement whenever he complimented her or shared his thoughts with her alone. Their chemistry was undeniable, and what had begun as an innocent connection quickly deepened into an affair. The first kiss was unexpected, a moment of weakness when their eyes met during a particularly intense conversation about a new business venture. It was a spark that ignited something neither of them could easily control. From that moment on, the affair escalated. They began meeting in secret, in hotels and rented spaces where their shared passion couldn't be interrupted. The more they were together, the more difficult it became for Veronica to ignore the growing bond between them. Meanwhile, Jacob remained oblivious. His world continued to revolve around Harrow innovations. He trusted Veronica to handle her part of the business while he focused on the bigger picture. The late nights and frequent business trips didn't raise any suspicions. After all, Veronica had always been the type of woman who put her career first. But Veronica was changing. She was no longer content to be the supportive wife standing by Jacob's side. The excitement of the affair with Victor filled a void in her that she hadn't even realized existed. As she grew closer to Victor, she became more distant from Jacob, withdrawing emotionally and physically. The small moments of intimacy that had once existed between them were replaced by a coldness that Jacob couldn't understand. He knew something was wrong, but he couldn't put his finger on it. Little did he know the woman he had trusted most had already started to slip away from him, caught up in a dangerous web of desire and betrayal that would soon shatter their lives forever. The revelation came at a moment when Jacob Harrow's life was already teetering on the edge. The pressure of managing his company, facing stiff competition from Victor Moore, and dealing with his deteriorating marriage had begun to wear him thin. Jacob, once a man of laser focus, found himself distracted and irritable, but still determined to hold on to what he had. He believed that the cracks in his personal life could be patched up with time. What he didn't realize was that the foundation of his life, his marriage, had already been crumbling beneath him. The moment of truth came late one evening when Jacob was working late at his home office. He had become suspicious of Veronica's behavior over the past few weeks. She had been distant, cold, and increasingly unavailable. She often claimed to be busy with work, but Jacob's gut told him something wasn't right. He had noticed a few things, little signs that seemed insignificant on their own, but, when pieced together, told a different story. Veronica's phone was always close to her, never left unattended, and she began taking private calls that she wouldn't share details about. The final piece of the puzzle came when Jacob noticed a strange name appearing in her text messages: Victor Moore. It wasn't unusual for business contacts to reach out to Veronica, but the messages seemed far more personal than anything business. Driven by a mix of concern and suspicion, Jacob did what he had never done before. He went through her phone. He found nothing overtly alarming at first, but as he scrolled through the messages, a series of conversations caught his eye. They were intimate, flirtatious even. Words of longing, shared inside jokes, and promises of secrecy filled the screen. Jacob's heart raced as he pieced together the horrifying reality. His wife, the woman he had trusted completely, had been having an affair with none other than his most formidable business rival. Veronica had kept their relationship hidden for months, perhaps longer, but Jacob could now see it all. The stolen kisses, the late-night rendezvous, the exchanges of affection that had once been reserved for him. His world seemed to crash around him as the truth sank in. His wife had not only betrayed him emotionally, but she had also betrayed him professionally. Veronica had shared confidential details about Harrow Innovations with Victor, feeding him inside information that would help his rival gain a competitive advantage in the market. It was the ultimate act of betrayal, one that would ruin both their personal and professional lives. At first, Jacob didn't know how to react. Anger surged through him, followed by a wave of confusion and disbelief. He stared at the phone screen, unable to comprehend the depth of the deception. How could she do this to him? How could she be with Victor, the man who was actively trying to destroy his company, the man who, just like him, sought power, influence, and control? When Veronica returned home that evening, Jacob confronted her. There were no denials, no attempts to cover up the truth. Veronica, though visibly shaken, did not seem surprised by the confrontation. She admitted to everything: the affair, her growing feelings for Victor, and the role she had played in sabotaging Jacob's business. She justified her actions by claiming that she had fallen in love with Victor, and that she had felt neglected by Jacob for far too long. She spoke of the loneliness she had endured while he buried himself in his work, leaving her isolated and craving attention. But even as she explained, Jacob couldn't bring himself to feel pity. The final blow came when Veronica admitted that she and Victor had been plotting against him, using his trust to take him down from the inside. The realization hit Jacob like a punch to the gut. It wasn't just a betrayal of love, it was a betrayal of everything he had worked for. Veronica had been complicit in the very thing that could destroy his empire. The conversation was cold and detached, as if Veronica had already emotionally checked out. She spoke matter-of-factly, as if this was a chapter that had already ended for her. But for Jacob, it was only beginning. The woman he had loved, the woman he had trusted, had turned his entire world upside down. And as the truth set in, he knew that nothing could ever be the same again. The days following the exposure of Veronica's affair and her betrayal were a blur for Jacob. His anger consumed him, turning every waking moment into a haze of rage and disbelief. He felt like a man who had been blindsided, stripped of everything he held dear, both personally and professionally. The company he had built with years of hard work was now on the verge of collapse, all because of the inside information Veronica had given to Victor. His marriage was in tatters, and the person he had trusted the most was now a stranger. Jacob couldn't just let it go. He couldn't move on. He needed answers, and more than that, he needed revenge. His obsession with Victor Moore grew with each passing day. The more he thought about what had transpired, how his wife had turned against him, how his competitor had used that weakness to his advantage, the more his desire for retribution consumed him. Every part of Jacob wanted to confront Victor, to make him pay for the destruction he had caused. But it wasn't just about business anymore. It was about something far deeper, something personal. Victor had stolen his wife, and in Jacob's mind, that made him more than just a business rival. It made him an enemy. Victor, ever the confident and smooth operator, didn't seem to take Jacob's growing hostility seriously. Jacob had sent several messages warning him of consequences, but Victor dismissed them as nothing more than the desperate ramblings of a betrayed husband. He had no fear. After all, he had everything going for him now. Veronica, the business edge, and the upper hand in their competition. He didn't understand the depths of Jacob's fury, nor did he anticipate the consequences of underestimating his rival. Jacob had been planning for days. He knew exactly where Victor would be on the evening of the confrontation, at a secluded restaurant, a spot favored by many in the business world. It was the perfect location, a place where the two could speak without the prying eyes of others. Jacob, unable to contain the anger building within him, showed up unannounced. He didn't want a conversation. He didn't want closure. Excerpt: He wanted justice. He wanted Victor to know the price of his actions. When Jacob arrived, he saw Victor sitting at a corner table, casually scrolling through his phone. For a moment, Jacob hesitated. He considered walking away, maybe letting the situation go and accepting the loss. But in that brief second, everything seemed to crystallize in his mind. The lies, the betrayal, the years of hard work that had been shattered by one man's greed. Jacob knew he couldn't let Victor off so easily. He had to make him understand the gravity of what he had done. Without a word, Jacob approached the table, his face twisted with anger. Victor looked up, his expression one of mild surprise. He tried to greet Jacob with a casual smile, but the tension in the air was undeniable. Jacob didn't respond. Instead, he slammed his hand down onto the table, causing the glassware to rattle. The shock on Victor's face quickly turned to amusement, as though he thought Jacob was merely trying to intimidate him. He stood up slowly, trying to remain composed, but the simmering hostility between them was palpable. The confrontation escalated quickly. Words were exchanged, harsh, biting words that dug deep into the wounds Jacob had been nursing. The insults flew, each one more cutting than the last. Jacob accused Victor of stealing not only his company but also the woman he had loved. He called him a coward, a manipulator. But Victor, with his characteristic arrogance, simply laughed it off, dismissing Jacob's fury as the result of a man's broken pride. In that moment, something inside Jacob snapped. All his emotions, his grief, his rage, his sense of betrayal came crashing together. With a sudden surge of adrenaline, he grabbed a knife from the table. The movement was swift, fueled by years of pent-up frustration and an overwhelming need for retribution. Victor's smirk faltered as he attempted to step back, but it was too late. Jacob's rage was uncontrollable. The knife found its mark. It all happened so quickly that neither man could fully comprehend the gravity of what had occurred until it was over. Victor collapsed to the floor, blood pooling beneath him as he gasped for breath. Jacob stood frozen, his mind racing, unable to process what he had just done. The man who had been his rival, the man who had taken everything from him, was now lying lifeless before him. For a long moment, Jacob didn't move. It was as if time had stopped. He could hear the faint sounds of his own breathing, the echo of his heartbeat in his ears, but nothing else. The weight of his actions slowly began to sink in. What had started as a moment of vengeance had spiraled into something irreversible. He had crossed a line, and now there was no turning back. Jacob's world had just shattered further than he ever thought possible. The aftermath of that fatal confrontation hit Jacob Harrow like a wave crashing against a fragile shore. For a brief moment, as he stood frozen over Victor's lifeless body, there was a strange sense of clarity. He felt as though he had taken control, as though he had somehow righted the wrongs that had been done to him. But that fleeting sense of power quickly evaporated as the enormity of what he had done began to sink in. The room felt smaller, the air thick with the weight of his actions. He had murdered Victor Moore, the man who had stolen his wife and sought to ruin his company. But at that moment, Jacob realized that even this act of vengeance couldn't bring him the peace he craved. The sound of distant voices from nearby tables pulled him back to reality. Panic set in. The restaurant, once a quiet haven for business deals and social gatherings, was now a crime scene. Jacob knew that in the next few minutes everything would unravel. His entire life, the business he had worked so hard to build, his reputation and his marriage was slipping through his fingers. He didn't know what to do. How to undo the damage. His mind raced as he tried to think of a way out, but there was no escape from what he had done. He ran, though, the primal instinct to flee taking over. He bolted out of the restaurant, his heart pounding in his chest as he navigated the streets in a daze. The cool night air didn't soothe him, it only made him feel more exposed, more vulnerable. He couldn't stay in the city, not now. But where could he go? What could he do? The thought of facing the police, of facing Veronica, who would no doubt find out soon, was unbearable. As Jacob sought refuge in the solitude of his own thoughts, the world around him moved quickly. The news of Victor Moore's death spread like wildfire through the business world. His company mourned the loss of its charismatic leader, and the media was quick to speculate. The story of a rivalry gone too far, a business feud ending in violence, became the headline of the week. But for Jacob, the story had only just begun. Veronica, in the days that followed, was caught in her own storm of emotions. At first, she was numb, unable to comprehend the horror of what had happened. She hadn't expected this. She hadn't expected Jacob to go so far, to take matters into his own hands with such finality. She had seen the cracks forming in their marriage, the tension rising between them, but never did she imagine that it would culminate in murder. She had been part of the destruction of Jacob's empire, but even she hadn't fully realized the extent of the damage. Now, with Victor dead, there was no one left to help her navigate the aftermath. Jacob's arrest was swift. Within hours of the murder, the police had traced him down. They found him in a small, nondescript motel, barely able to keep his composure. His fingerprints were all over the scene of the crime, and there was no denying that he had been the one to take Victor's life. The case was open and shut. Jacob was charged with first-degree murder, and his trial quickly became a public spectacle. The business world turned on Jacob. The man who had once been hailed as a visionary, a titan of the tech industry, was now a murderer. Harrow Innovations, his pride and joy, crumbled under the weight of the scandal. Investors pulled their support, and competitors moved in to take advantage of the vacuum left in Jacob's absence. His life, once filled with ambition and success, was now defined by the very act that had destroyed it. In prison, Jacob's thoughts were consumed with regret. He had lost everything: his wife, his company, his freedom. The woman he had trusted had become a stranger, and the business he had poured his soul into had been torn apart. The worst part was knowing that, even if he had succeeded in punishing Victor, it hadn't made him feel better. It hadn't brought back the life he had lost. All that remained was a hollow, irreversible decision that had ruined not just one life, but many. Veronica, left to pick up the shattered pieces of her own life, now faced the consequences of her choices. She had once thought she could play both sides, pursuing her affair with Victor while still holding on to the remnants of her marriage with Jacob. But now, with both men gone from her life, she was left to face the emptiness that had been created by her own actions. She had lost Jacob, and she had lost herself in the process. The price of her betrayal had been higher than she could have ever imagined. The end came quietly, like the closing of a door that could never be opened again. Jacob Harrow sat in his prison cell, staring at the cold, sterile walls around him, his mind replaying the events that had led him here. He had once been a man who believed in the power of hard work, in the belief that success was earned through dedication and vision. Now that same vision felt like a distant memory, a dream that had slipped through his fingers the moment his rage had consumed him. Jacob had been convicted of first-degree murder. The trial had been swift and the evidence overwhelming. The jury deliberated for only a short time before reaching their verdict. There was no question about who had killed Victor Moore, and Jacob knew he deserved the punishment he received. He had crossed a line that could never be undone. The loss of his freedom, his wealth, and his reputation was just the beginning of his punishment. The weight of what he had done, what he had destroyed, was something he would carry with him forever. Veronica's life had crumbled as well, though her path took a different turn. With Jacob behind bars and Victor gone, she found herself isolated, her career in ruins. She had once believed that her affair with Victor had been an escape, a chance to find something beyond the confines of her marriage, but now all she had were the pieces of a broken life. The business world turned its back on her, and the betrayal she had once thought would bring her freedom only led her into deeper despair. She had no one left to turn to, no one who could fill the emptiness left by the choices she had made. Months passed, and the story of the once promising businessman turned murderer faded from the headlines. People moved on as they always did, forgetting the faces behind the scandal. But Jacob and Veronica's lives would never be the same. Jacob spent his days in his cell, contemplating the wreckage of his past. The man he had been was gone, and in his place stood someone unrecognizable, a man defined by his failures, by the choices that had brought him here. As time moved on, Jacob's name was no longer whispered in the halls of business empires or discussed in boardrooms. The world had moved forward, and the once great Harrow innovations became nothing more than a footnote in the annals of tech history. In the end, Jacob realized there was no redemption for what he had done. The life he had once dreamed of, success, love, power, was gone, leaving behind only the quiet, unchangeable truth of his choices.